We are live on the Minvo Procast. I am your host, Marc Ronick, and supposed to be joining me is my friend Jason Cercone of Bomb Track Media. Jason is having some tech issues trying to go live here. His browser is trying to update and giving him all sorts of trouble. He has texted me just now to say he's going to try a different computer and hopefully he's going to use that different computer and it's all going to work out just fine. So until then, pardon me, I do want to tease that if you RSVP'd before 11 a.m. this morning, that's Eastern time, if you RSVP'd, you are on our list to win a free Minvo lifetime subscription. And we will be spinning that wheel momentarily. Since I have a little bit of extra time here, I will share what that wheel looks like. Hopefully I'm going to share the right one with you. Here we go. There we are. That is our wheel. If you see your name on there, that means you got in before around 11 a.m. Eastern time, and you are on that wheel. We will, although David Salib, I see your name there, you won't count because you already have a lifetime subscription to Minvo. Okay, let's see now. I'm going to stop this. And what I'm going to say is, while we're waiting, let's do an AMA, Ask Me Anything. As some of you know who've been catching the Minvo Procast, or maybe you know me from the Podcasting Morning Chat, I am a 20-year podcaster, been doing the audio and video for quite some time now. And if you've got questions around your YouTube channel, around your podcast, happy to answer those questions. I am checking the chat now. I see we've got a couple people in here on YouTube, and let me see, and we got some people here in the chat on LinkedIn. So one of the requirements to win that Minvo subscription is you've got to be here. You got to be here listening live. And I would love for you to participate as well. So if you've got any questions or need any guidance, any advice, we would love to hear from you. Let's see. So I'll tell you a little bit about me in the meantime. Sorry, I'm just checking to see if we're hearing from Jason. He says it's working. I'm going to tell him great. And come on over, Jason, because I'm anxious to speak to you. Jason and I go way back, and as this recurring theme continues, met Jason at a podcasting conference in 2021. Actually, the same one if you joined us for the Procast with Travis Brown. He is the one that introduced Jason and I. And we've been friends ever since. We've collaborated on multiple projects together. I've been on his shows. He's been a part of some of mine, including the Podcasting Morning Chat that we do every weekday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern time. We actually do it live, believe it or not, on Clubhouse. Yes, Clubhouse is still a thing, still out there. And we do it there. Mainly we're using Clubhouse not for discoverability, because it's been terrible for discoverability. We mainly are using it as our means of communication so that we can have a live audience on an audio platform and allow them to participate, come up. It's kind of like taking live calls on a radio show. And we answer all sorts of podcasting questions throughout the morning. We bring lots of different topics, similarly to like what we bring here on the Procast. And if you want to get more info on that, you can go to podpage.com/PMC. There we go. podpage.com/PMC. Let's see here. We'll get an update. All right. Jason is still saying he's a no-go. Still trying to make this work. And if we don't get Jason, what we'll do is we'll make this a short procast today. We'll spin that wheel for you, pick our winner, and we'll either try to come back later this week or we'll hit our next one next week. Next week, another friend of mine that I didn't meet at a conference, Gil is going to be joining us. He is one of the guys, one of the few people I know in this industry that really, if I have any video tech, audio tech, hardware, or software question, he's one of my first go-tos, Gil. And he's going to be joining us next week to share some cool ways to use some equipment to better improve your overall content creation. All right, I'm going to give Jason one more shot here, and then we will spin the wheel if Jason can't join us. All right, I'm sending Jason a message. Thank you for this impromptu. And I'm going to talk to you for a second, actually, as a creator to creator. This is a big lesson learned for me. Now, as I just shared with you moments ago, I do a live show every day, Monday through Friday. And you would think that if something goes wrong, a guest doesn't show up, or the topic we were going to do is no longer relevant and we're changing topics or what have you, you would think that I would be prepared to deal with that, especially if a guest isn't around that's supposed to be scheduled. I've learned my lesson today to have some backup content to either share in its place or to talk about in its place like I'm doing now. So if you are somebody who is thinking about going live or you do go live often, it's important to have your backup plan in place. Think about what are some of the key topics or pain points that my audience cares about, and structure that. Create an outline, create some questions, create some subtopics that then you can just go into and talk about. I'm giving myself that advice right now. All right, let me check the chat real quick. We've got any plans to add animations behind the videos? That comes from Rahul in our YouTube live stream. I can tell you now, I am not behind the scenes in that way with Minvo, although David and the team are very, very kind about sharing some of these new features coming up. That one in particular, Rahul, animations, I'm not aware of. Doesn't mean that it's not coming. And I have been talking to David and Minvo a little bit about features. We meet with them every week or so, and usually they'll ask us, me and Nick, what are some of the features that we'd love to see? And we'll share that with them. And I'm not going to be able to tell you these because I don't want to make promises for Minvo. But there are some additional features that will continue to be added to Minvo, and there's a couple that I'm super excited about. Let's see. And now I'm going to check out LinkedIn. Okay, we don't have any questions in there. We've got viewers, and nobody's asking any particular questions. So I'll ask you, what's your favorite part of Minvo? What do you enjoy most about it? Is there a feature? And I see somebody else is in the YouTube chat under the Minvo name. I wonder if that's Nick. We talked about the quality of Mac PC cameras being low quality. Are they good enough to simply get started, or should we make the investment from the beginning? So if you're looking to get into video and you don't have the budget for it yet, my suggestion is do what I'm doing right now. I'm using my iPhone as the camera here. Now, granted, during the live stream, the quality may not be as strong as the recording is going to be. right? Because buffering and upload speeds, download speeds, etc. So the quality may not look as great to you watching live. And the recordings, I assure you, are 4K because I'm using my iPhone Pro Max, which has got one of the best cameras as far as smartphones go. I have a little bit of an earlier model. I have the 14, and I know they just announced the 16, which I'm very excited about. I may actually make that move and get it. But I would suggest if you've got a smartphone that has a strong camera, that has a good quality camera on the back of it, go with that to start. Again, that's if you have a low budget, no budget, or maybe even you're not sure yet how committed you are to this podcasting thing or YouTubing thing, and you don't want to make such a big investment yet. That camera is awesome. I do have another HD camera that I use over there. It's an Elgato Face Cam Pro, and I've got it attached to my Elgato teleprompter. So when you sometimes see me looking from a different angle, I'm probably using that camera and may even be using that teleprompter. I don't always use it, but it's a really great camera, so I try to use it often. So I would suggest, yeah, if you've got a good phone, use that. I think my guest has arrived. Jason,
hey,
welcome.
What's up, brother?
We are live.
Oh, we're live.
Yeah.
You're not wasting any time, huh?
No, I couldn't waste time because we've got Minvo people here that want to win a lifetime subscription. We're giving away a lifetime subscription today, Jason.
Right on. Well, I'm sorry I held up the party.
That's okay. I learned a valuable lesson that I shared with our audience, which is if you're going to do a live stream, especially with a guest, be prepared in case for some reason the guest can't show.
Yes, I've had to ad-lib a few times on my own live stream, so that is a good lesson, my friend.
Yeah, and a good lesson that I got to work on my ad-lib skills as well, because I was definitely just stream of consciousness, and I'm not sure how entertaining that was. But
well, hopefully
here we
it's
are.
good practice, man. I'm sorry again. Technology fails me yet again.
That's okay. Look, I just started tonight is my third improv class. I've been taking improv lately, and
nice.
I think after a few more, I'll be better prepared for situations like this.
That's really cool. How's that going so far?
It's going well. It's definitely pushing me to my edge. It's definitely uncomfortable, but I love improv. I love watching improv. So being in it and getting to play the different games that I often watch and laugh at, it's fun to be a part of it. I will admit, I'm still waiting for my funny to come out. Right now, I'm able to participate in the games, but I want to be funnier, especially when I see other people being really funny. It makes me that much more want to be, but I'm going to just try to be patient and hope that comes through at some point.
All good things will come, my friend. Just keep
Have you ever done that? Have you ever taken an improv class?
You know, I never have. I always thought it would be something cool. I mean, you know me, I'm extroverted. I like to bring the humor out as much as I possibly can. So
yeah,
I've been kicking around doing Toastmasters, but I had not kicked around doing improv. You've planted a seed, man. Maybe there's something new I have to look into here.
Toastmasters is the other one that I'm looking into. And for me, I think it's going to work better for me to first do the improv thing so I can get comfortable public speaking in that way and being off the cuff like that and working with others, and then transition into the Toastmasters thing. I think that's definitely next on my hit list. And since we're talking about these types of things, what do you find is really valuable for a creator if they're thinking about joining a Toastmasters? What do you think they can expect to get out of something like that?
Well, I can't really speak to Toastmasters directly because I've never been a part of it myself. I know I've been just exploring the possibility of joining a group or two here in Pittsburgh. I think overall, from a creator standpoint, especially if you put this in a podcasting perspective, it's all about conversation. And the better conversations you can have, the more powerful connections you're going to make. And I feel that's a skill and a muscle that you can flex every day.
Yeah.
No matter where you're at in the world, you can have conversations with people. I often think about this when I'm at the store any type of store where I'm talking to a cashier, I'm always trying to engage them in some respect
Yeah.
because more than likely they've dealt with some pretty mean people throughout the day. And even if you're with them for just 2 minutes and you actually talk to them about their day and what they like about their job, whatever, pretend you're in that environment where you're interviewing them like it was your podcast and you want to get a good story out of them. That little 2-3 minute window could change their whole perspective on their day. And at the same time, for you, you are being a good human and you're building that skill set of being able to have a good conversation, have active listening in play. So I think anything like that, where you're going to be in an environment where you can have those types of conversations, it's only going to lead to more positive creativity when you go to make your podcast, make live streams, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I was thinking about what you're saying, how you like to engage with anybody, at the store or what the people working there or what have you. I get particularly challenged when I notice that person looks like they're having a bad day or is disinterested in talking to me. It's a challenge to get them to actually loosen up and enjoy a little bit of the conversation.
It really is. And that's a challenge that you can take on, because if you can do that in that environment where you know your time is limited, when you get into that one-on-one environment of a podcast, you have some skills that you can reach back and find. And you may have to dig deep, but sometimes people aren't willing to engage when they join a podcast either.
Yeah.
Whether it's just the overall vibe is not what they expected, or they're having a bad day themselves and they unfortunately bring that to the recording session with them. Sometimes it's your show. It's up to you to dig into what's going to get the most out of that guest and asking some questions that often, I would say, putting the spotlight on them and letting them share something that they care about, that can get the ball rolling and get a person thinking a little bit differently about the environment that they're in. And even if their day has been not so great, they can start thinking about some of the positives and maybe start to accentuate those, and then the conversation can flow from there.
Yeah, I love that. And here we go, already riffing, and this was off script already. I didn't plan that question, but here we are. Jason and I tend to do that, and Jason often does that. He does a great job of that. So let's introduce everybody to you officially, shall we, Jason? You've been podcasting since, I believe, 2015. Mm-hmm. And I think both as a host and a guest, you've done shows of your own. You've been a permanent guest on occasion, right? What first pulled you into this space, and what about podcasting made you say, this is it? This is where I want to be?
Well, what pulled me in was spite. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. I'm sure at some point in our paths crossing, I've brought this up, but back in 2015, I had very little knowledge of what podcasting was. I was working in the beer industry, and I mean, I had a full-time job. I had started a beer blog, and that was my big thing. And I had decided to monetize that by launching an app for beer enthusiasts here in Pittsburgh that would connect them to events and beer releases and all these great things. And I had a lot of fun with it, and I ended up bringing on some partners that wanted to be a part of it so they could advertise. And as the app grew, they knew that would potentially open up new business opportunities for them. The day I launched the app, some guy started trolling me on Twitter, telling me how terrible of a job I was doing and how awful this idea was. And I'm at that point had no idea what a troll was. And of course, I'm now interacting back and forth, and we're in this big Twitter war. And then I finally, in the midst of that conversation, said, what does this guy do? Why does he feel he can have this strong of an opinion of what I'm trying to build here? And I went and looked, and he just happened to be the co-host of a beer podcast.
Oh.
So it just so happened that me and my friend had been talking very loosely about starting a podcast. We were just throwing around ideas like, would we talk about football? Would we talk about pro wrestling? What would we do if we really wanted to do a podcast? And nothing was really materializing until that happened. So I called my friend. I said, we're going to do a beer podcast, and we're going to do it better than that guy. And my friend is a big beer fan. He said, that sounds great. Let's do it. So we did no planning, and we pretty much got on Amazon, got the equipment, and 2 weeks later we were up and running. We had a podcast, and we were terrible. Do
you still have that?
I took it down.
But do you own it anywhere?
It's got to be on a hard drive somewhere. I
Yeah.
don't know where though. If I find it someday, I mean, as a total, like, hey, look how far I've come, I will gladly share that. But I
Yeah.
mean, because I was in that industry, I think we got a little bit of a pass, but we had a few beers, like heavy beers before we recorded. We were at one of my clients' bars, and it was trivia night, so it was super loud. Like all these things that I would advise a new podcaster not to do. It's because I made the mistake. So I fell so you can stand up and run. But I knew positive spin on this. The first recording, even though it wasn't great, I knew I had found my thing. I had done radio in college and thought about pursuing it, and it never panned out. But that first podcast, I was like, this feels so natural to me. This feels so good. I've got to see where I can take this. And that's what I did. And so, yeah, it was almost 10 years ago at this point. So it's been a constant learning experience for me, trying to find the best ways to do this. And, like you said before, doing hosting and guesting and helping others produce, helping other people find the right shows to guest on, to have the best guest experience. There's so much in this package that I've been fortunate enough to explore over the last 10 years. And I'm looking forward to what the next 10 might bring.
Yeah, and the latest venture is Bomb Track Media.
Yeah.
And that you started up, I guess, about a little over a year ago. Is that right? And you've had other iterations of your business, but this is the new branding, and that was like a year or so ago.
Almost.
Right?
It was, yeah, coming up on that. It was just early 2024 was when I officially rolled things out. So we're about 9, and I mean, in the pre-planning, I was probably doing some talking about it, so it probably feels like a year.
Okay.
But it's been really the idea behind Bomb Track Media was to bring businesses a more efficient way to develop podcast content and to get the most from it, because we know that as business owners, entrepreneurs, no matter what field you're in, you've got a lot on your plate. There's a lot of responsibilities that you have to take care of each and every day. Mark, you know this as much as I do. Podcasting could be a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
So now you try to add that into everything else you're doing, it's a very tall order. So my goal has been to show different businesses, this is how you can do this in a much more efficient manner. You can get content that you can utilize across your entire digital footprint. So all those boxes that you need to check off in regards to marketing, it can all come from your podcast. And you don't have to be there every single week, because we're going to build your podcast in a season format that allows you to create a resource that you can direct customers towards, or it could be used for discovery. So new customers can find you on Google or Bing or whatever, Perplexity, you name it. Like there's a number of places where they might discover you, but your content is going to serve as a means of education, entertainment, ultimately helps that customer build trust in you. That way they pick up the phone or send you a message, whatever they want to do. But the ideal thing to understand is that there are other ways to build podcast content. You don't have to get locked into this. I got to produce 3 episodes a week or else this won't work, because there's some numbskulls out there that tell you that. And it's just, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. And I want to get to that strategy too, that you just mentioned about seasonal podcasting. And before we do, I also want to ask you a little bit about video and specifically YouTube, because recently this year, YouTube, at least on occasion, maybe not steadily, but more and more so steadily, has been surpassing Apple as the top platform for podcasts. So what do you think this shift means for creators and brands, and how do you think they should adapt to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I think that obviously the video component, because we have it at our disposal. If we could thank COVID for anything, which really isn't much, but maybe we can thank it for normalizing this method of podcast creation. I know I was doing it through Ecamm and Skype before COVID, and many others were as well. But for the most part, a lot of podcasters I knew were trying to connect with people locally because they had studio access, or they could just get together at somebody's house and they could create in person. Of course, that's a great way to create content, but it also limits how far your reach goes. COVID came along and we were all locked down in our houses, and now all of a sudden Riverside and StreamYard and all of these great platforms came along and normalized this whole experience for us where we can connect with somebody on the other side of the globe and create great content together. So in doing that, we have this video component naturally built in. It'd be silly not to use it. I firmly believe that there's never going to be a replacement for the audio component of podcasting because people can consume it in so many different ways that they can't consume video.
What do
in
you
the
mean?
car. While they can consume a podcast while they're in the car, at the gym, walking the
Right.
dog, doing chores. It's in your ear. It's passive.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that with video. Now, of course, and that's taking nothing away from video. We as humans are going to consume content in the moment that we're in. So if we're watching videos, the podcast content, it could impact somebody that may not be a podcast listener at all. But the savvy podcasters are taking that content and repurposing it and delivering it to these people in a new medium so they can still get that experience. They can still learn and get entertainment from the podcast without actually having to listen to it, because reality is not everybody does consume podcasts in audio form. That's where I feel YouTube is becoming such a powerful medium in this, and all the other video platforms as well, because video is something that we're always going to turn to. I know when I have a problem with something, I am going to YouTube first. That's typically my first stop. I am looking to see what type of video I can find to learn, or hopefully maybe if I have to fix something around the house, it can teach me something in a few minutes that will help me do that. So using your podcast content for that specific purpose, it can only do good things. And I think if you're not looking at that side of it, you absolutely have to start, because you're missing a tremendous piece of the pie. And again, like you said, Mark, it's become such a hotbed for discoverability. If you're not leaning into it, you're probably losing potential market share, at least in regards to growth of your podcast. It's going to make things harder as you continue to press on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, so lately for me, I've been steering away from Google and YouTube to search for things when I'm looking for answers. I've been using Perplexity. I go to Perplexity AI first, and it usually will do a couple of things for me. It'll give me a list of like step-by-step, how to fix that faucet or what have you, and it'll give me the steps, and it'll also give me YouTube videos too. So I like it even better now than using something like Google. Mm-hmm. Regarding YouTube and podcasting and video podcasting, which camp do you fall in? Because in the industry, there are people that say if it's a podcast, it's audio only. If it's a video, it's a YouTube video and YouTube channel. It's content for YouTube. Where do you fall in that?
I honestly don't think I've... That's a great question, because I don't know where I fall. I don't look at podcast content that way. I'm one of those guys that believes that the term podcast is outdated. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people don't even know what a podcast or a pod is, because, correct me if I'm wrong, this started with iPod, right?
Yep, 100%. That's where the name comes from.
Go to a 13-year-old and say, hey, you know what an iPod is? They're going to look at you like you have four heads. So that term, you and I have had conversations about this. I actually just recorded an episode for my podcast about this that will come out later this week, about the term podcast being in your title. Does it need to happen anymore? Because we're seeing this content utilized in so many different ways, including video, that you don't even have to really define it as a podcast, even though we do, because that's the accepted vernacular. Maybe someday that will go away. Pure speculation on my point. I'm not trying to pick a fight. I'm not trying to, anything. It's just like, I sometimes wonder, because that was developed for a piece of technology that is no longer really in the world. Well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think Apple's producing new iPods.
They're not making
anymore.
New ones. They're not making new ones. No.
I know I got as much mileage out of my iPod as I possibly could before it finally died on me. And I was like, well, okay, I'm already on an iPhone now. I don't need to use this anymore. I had so much music in there.
Yeah.
Man. But nevertheless, I don't necessarily fall into a camp of, it's only a video podcast or it's not a video podcast. I think it's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
What do you want your show to be? Do you want it to be strictly audio? Because there's nothing wrong with that. You're not doing it wrong if you don't do that. I'm saying you're missing opportunities if you don't utilize the video. But maybe you don't want to have an actual podcast for the audio part. You're recording a live stream to have a live stream series. Or you're just recording videos to have a video or have a video series, and it can be called a podcast if you want it to be.
Right.
Who's gonna tell you to stop? There's no regulation on this stuff, right?
I could list a few names who would tell you to stop, but they don't actually have the authority to make you stop.
They're not going to show up to your house with handcuffs if you call your video show a podcast. That's outside of their jurisdiction.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm kind of the same way, Jason. I feel like who cares is really my thought. It's like, if you want to call it a podcast, so be it. The bottom line is, are you putting together a show that delivers entertainment, that delivers value, that's going to keep the attention of whoever that audience is that you're trying to keep their attention? So I would say, yeah, it's really what you want it to be. And I think these days, if you're not doing both, it could hurt you. Right. And like you said, I'm with you. If somebody prefers only to do audio or only to do video, that's their choice and it can work for you. I like to think, though, if you're really trying to get your reach as far out there as possible, then do both, right? Put out that video and the audio, and don't worry about whether or not somebody says it's a podcast or not. I think that's what it comes down to.
I agree. Maximize your content, and everybody else is already wrapped up in their own things anyway. So if you try something that you want to do because it's making you happy and it's allowing you to work smarter, not harder, do it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about somebody else saying you're doing it wrong, because chances are they're doing something wrong too. Or they're in no position to say that you are or not. If it's working for you, if it's getting you results, that's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. So you mentioned a moment ago, podcast. Don't put that in the titles, I think is the message you're trying to say. Are there any exceptions to that? And let's be clear what we're talking about here. This is when somebody is naming their whole series, the podcast series, right? And let's say it's on, it's called Drinking Coffee. Okay. Like, I'm just making it up because I'm looking at my coffee mug here. Drinking Coffee. And Jason is saying there are some people who will choose to add the word podcast at the end of that. Drinking Coffee podcast. Jason, not a fan of that?
Not a fan of that.
Is there ever a time where that does work?
Well, I think that what I'm looking at now is the fact that it sounds cleaner if you don't have the word podcast at the end. I also believe that where we are in the world, attention spans notwithstanding, we're smart people. And if we're on a podcast app, we know that we're looking for a podcast. Just like if we were on Facebook, we know we're going to land on somebody's Facebook page. If we're on YouTube, we're going to land on their YouTube channel. We know where we are. Now, the small exception, if you did want to argue, is that if you go on Google, if it's called the whatever podcast, if it ranks, then it's going to show a person, well, this is a podcast. But what I believe is that when somebody is doing an organic search and they're looking for an answer to a problem, they're not going to care whether it's a podcast, a video, something written. All they want is their problem solved. Mm-hmm. So what it really comes down to is the aesthetics. And where I really feel that where the water gets muddy is when I see a podcast that's called something. I saw this, I really can't remember the name, and I wouldn't call a person out over it, but it was just something I was like, this is too redundant. It was the podcast about something podcast. Well, why do you need that? I mean, the podcast about something is as direct as you could possibly be. You don't have to have the word podcast in there twice. That's way too, what's the Department of Redundancy department.
Yes.
When I recorded this episode, I put out, I believe it goes out tomorrow in our live setting here for anybody watching this one. It was my free plug. But I had made the joke because the show that I'm doing on is called Podcast Theory. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, you have it in your title, dude, and you're telling me not to. But what I'm saying I don't have is Podcast Theory Podcast.
Right.
Or the Podcast Theory Podcast, because that's just too much. So overall, my opinion on this really stems from how clean it makes the title look. Like, and I referenced my other show, Let's Blow This Up. That sounds much better and much more impactful than Let's Blow This Up podcast. Now, my tagline does have the word podcast in it, it's more insightful podcasting content, or insightful podcast. I just changed this now. I can't remember it. Insightful podcasting insights for businesses and brands, something to that effect. But nevertheless, that's my take on it. I know that some people don't feel that way. I just feel that it comes off cleaner and looks better without the word podcast tacked on to the end.
Yeah, for me,
One man's opinion.
I agree with you about the redundancy thing. Like if you're going to if you're doing a podcast about podcasting, you probably only need that word once in the title. I'm with you there.
Right.
I think though that there are oftentimes a lot of authors that create podcasts based off of their books, right? So, again, if the book title is Drinking Coffee, then I would make an argument, you may want to call the podcast Drinking Coffee Podcast so that there creates some separation there between the book and the podcast.
I'll go with you on that. That could be an exception.
Right? I feel like that works.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like we've said, it comes down to what you want, right? Like we're giving our opinions on what we feel is the most effective way to promote a podcast, to package your podcast. And for the most part, you're leaning toward one way, I'm leaning toward the other. I don't really care if people add that name to it, but that's the idea of this show, is to give our creators multiple opinions and allow them to pick what works best for them. And the big advice is test it. See if it actually works well or doesn't work well for you. And another area of debate in the industry is whether or not you do seasonal podcasting. You had talked about that earlier, or you just do episodic and it's one episode after the other, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or what have you. And you were making a case earlier for seasonal podcasting. So tell us a little bit about why.
I believe it comes down to one word: time. Especially with brands and businesses, you've got a lot on your plate, as I said before. You've got a lot of things that you're responsible for, and trying to add in a weekly podcast, while it sounds sexy and it sounds advantageous, it's a lofty thing. It takes a lot of your time, because I know, Mark, you and I know we've discussed this before. It's not just about the podcast itself. It's everything else that goes behind the scenes in the production and the acquisition of a guest, and then preparing that guest and setting expectations, and then building assets to market the show and sharing that with your guest, all this communication that takes place. Then when the show goes live, you got to promote it and market it and let people know it's active and there for them to listen to. And then you just got to repeat the process all over the next week. So it can be a lot. Now, if you have the time in your schedule to make that happen, do it. Hell, go nuts. Have a couple episodes a week if you want to. Just understand what you're getting into. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we all, as podcasters on this side of it, have to combat. And I'm seeing it so much because I'm following the Facebook threads in the communities and on Threads itself, just watching how people interact. So many people are launching their podcast with one episode. That's completely wrong.
Yeah.
That is the worst way to do it, because what you're going to do, for one, you're not giving your audience enough content to really grab hold of. One episode feels like a test balloon. And oftentimes you're going to look at the stats right after day one and be so disappointed in yourself, and you're going to validate all these concerns that you had before you started. Oh my God, no one wants to listen to me, and here these numbers prove it. I suck. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then I leave after that episode, or maybe I try a couple more and get similar results, and ultimately I bail. I don't think that you should be starting your podcast. If you're going to go weekly, you shouldn't be starting until you have 15 episodes recorded.
Okay.
That allows you to do a huge launch. And this is what I'm all about. If you're doing, regardless, seasons or weekly, your launch is a huge deal, and you need to treat it as such. You need to treat it like the Macy's Day Parade. Launch 5 episodes, dump them all at once, do it one a day for 5 days and call it launch week, whatever you want to do. Give your audience a substantial block of content to really take a bite out of it. This is going to lead to better feedback. This is going to lead to more reviews. This is going to lead to more listeners or more listenership, because they've got more content to listen to. If they liked episode 1, they're going to move on to episode 2, right? They're going to keep going down the track. We live in a binge culture. Maybe they don't want to start with episode 1. You drop them all at once. They could listen to episode 5 because that title grabbed them first. You're giving your listener an experience that goes beyond just checking out one episode to see what it might be like. This is why I believe in seasons, because if you record that block of content all at once, you could have 2 seasons essentially already in the bank.
Yeah.
Launch 8 of those episodes as season 1. Market the hell out of it with all the content you can create using Minvo to repurpose all of it. That's, of course, the platform that we're talking about today, or that we're championing today. Then you've got all these other episodes in the bank. You can come back with season 2. You can also add to that because, I just thought of something new that I didn't think about. We'll record another episode and put it in season 2. You're setting yourself up for more success. And Mark, I know this is a stat that we've kicked around a lot lately. 90% of podcasters don't get beyond 3 episodes.
Yep.
That is horrifying.
It is.
Because every single podcaster that has fallen flat at that point was more than likely super excited when they came up with the idea for their podcast. But something got in the way. Something after 1 or 2 episodes told them this is not right. You shouldn't be doing this. It's that guy in your head telling you, stop, you suck.
Mm-hmm.
But what was really happening is they're just not bringing the right strategy to the table, and they're not thinking long-term and thinking about this long-term growth strategy of, if I have seasons, I record a bunch of episodes and I'm done. Or if I'm going weekly, I record 12 to 15 episodes at a minimum. I launch with 5. I've still got 7 weeks of content that I can roll out 1 episode per week, and then I can start building from there. I have feedback from my audience that I can utilize for future episodes, and I can start loving the podcast creation process, not hating it after an episode or 2.
Yeah.
And that's something that I feel a lot of people run into. So, to long-winded answer your question here, but if you're going to do seasons, I think it's a smart way to start, because if you've never podcasted before, it gives you an opportunity to get a feel for what it's like without putting all this pressure on you to be there every week. If you want to go weekly, just understand the commitment that is involved with doing that, but set yourself up for success. Don't just do 1 episode and throw it out there to see what happens, because you won't like what you see.
Yep.
Know exactly what you want to record, get them all recorded, take your time. The world's gone this long without your podcast. It can go a couple more months.
Yeah.
Because that's going to, right? Like, that will put
Mm-hmm.
you in a better position for long-term success. And that's what we need to see more of in this space.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I like that batch strategy that you talked about, whether you're episodic or seasonal, launching with multiple shows, and specifically the strategy you mentioned about 1 a day that week, because a lot of these algorithms are looking at the activity on your channel or your podcast. They're looking at the download activity. They're looking at the play activity. And if you're giving multiple pieces of content in that first week and people are actually consuming that content, well, then that might trigger the algorithm to start pushing that to more people to enjoy your content. So it's a great strategy for multiple reasons, whether it's for human reasons or algorithm reasons. I think that's a great strategy to take on.
Yeah, no, make it a big deal. That's all.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to do.
I think so. By the way, in the chat, I believe in the YouTube chat, Travis Brown, recent guest, and the person who connected the 2 of us said hello. So he's in there watching today. So hello to Travis.
What's up, Travis?
And by the way, in a few moments, we're going to spin that wheel and find out who wins the Minvo subscription for life. Before we do that, I want to ask Jason a few more questions here. So, Jason, let's touch on things like engagement. Things like, let's start there. What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see podcasters making when they try to grow an audience? And how do they fix that?
Well, I think one of the big things, I mean, it may not even really be directly related to audience growth. It's begging for a review after every episode. And I understand that that's usually a static outro that's recorded of, go leave us a rating and review if you like this show. I feel like that convolutes things a little bit, because it's not about all the ratings. It's not about reviews. If you get them, great. Personally, I'm fine if somebody goes and leaves that. In fact, of course, I'm thanking them for that too. But I like when somebody reaches out to me directly and lets me know firsthand, this is what I thought, whether it's good or bad. So that's one thing I think could be improved. It's not necessarily having that in place. I mean, you can do it from time to time, but having it after every episode, I don't know. It's this may sound bad. I think it's kind of tacky. I don't know, it's just
Okay, that's fair. I mean, especially if you're doing that same call to action at the end of every episode. And I would also say this is where traditional podcasters, and I'll call that, those were the people that were mainly doing audio and now coming over to the YouTube and video side. I would say that when we're talking about what we can learn from those YouTubers, it's that follow us here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, like the video. You'll see those things coming up more often during the video, not at the end. And I think that's the big mistake that so many have been taught, including myself, being taught that. And I used to teach that, ask at the end for people to rate and review. And I don't think that works, because I don't know how many people, you have to check your own stats to see this, but I don't believe that most audiences are staying till the very end. And if you're waiting at the end to ask your audience to do anything, whatever it is, rate or review, go to my website, whatever that is, I think if you're waiting, you're actually hurting yourself instead of helping. And I'd suggest start doing it a couple of times. And I know that goes against what you're saying, but I would say whatever that call to action is, it should probably happen a couple of times, and it should be sprinkled in once or twice throughout the recording, not at the very end.
And that's fine too. I mean, I think there's probably more benefit to a call to action that doesn't necessarily push somebody to leave you a review, because in a lot of cases, maybe they're listening on Spotify. Maybe they're listening on a different app and it's not Apple. Maybe they don't have an Apple product. So asking for that, maybe they don't have access to it. It's sort of wasting your call to action. So maybe there's more benefit in having them jump over to your website so they can get on your email list, or maybe there's more benefit to them joining you on your favorite social media platform, or, hey, we're doing more video content on YouTube, you should subscribe to our channel. I think again, this could go a number of different ways. That's just, again, one person's opinion in regards to reviews. Of course, they're valuable and they can help, but I think asking for it every single episode isn't something that needs to be done. I think the more important point that speaks to all of this, and I think this does speak to growth, because it's all about retention and keeping people invested in the message of your show. If you're taking forever to get them to that, more than likely they're not coming back for more content, or they're not even getting through that first episode they clicked on. So you don't need to have a lot of fluff with like a 1.5 to 2 minute worded intro of like, this is what the show is and this is why I'm doing it and blah, blah, blah. It's all about me, not about you. Like, no, that's not what I'm here for. And then you follow it up with this monologue that's 8 to 10 minutes, and then you throw in some housekeeping items, and all of a sudden you're 15 minutes in and you haven't even got to the interview yet. Like, I came to this because you told me I'm going to learn about X, Y, and Z. Get me to that as fast as possible. That's going to keep me invested in that episode, and more than likely it's going to get me exploring your catalog to look at other episodes as well. So you want to talk about growth, you want people listening to more episodes, so that's going to boost your numbers. You got to get them to the content that you got them hooked with as fast as possible.
Yeah, thank you. And you've got a question. Well, I'll present it to you. We've got a question in the chat. This is from Inder, and Inder asks, how can we nurture an audience and retain that audience? Do you have any tips or strategies on nurturing and maintaining your actual audience? Which, by the way, awesome question, because usually these questions are more about how do I get more? How do I get more? How do I get more? And Inder is actually interested in knowing, okay, I've got some of these audiences, these listeners, viewers, whatever, and now I want to make sure that they're known, that I'm here with them. I want to stay connected to them. So what tips do you have for Inder?
What I would say, this is something that I can't speak to 100%. All I know is I tinkered with it and I can see some positivity coming from it already. Once I end my seasons, I can dive into this more, but develop your email list and get them on your list and talk about different elements. Don't just use your email list to say episode 25's out. Pull certain elements from your podcast episode that you really enjoyed and start conversations with your audience. Make sure they this is the timestamp on this particular episode that I really want you to focus on because there's some absolute killer knowledge that you absolutely need to know. The more you build that list and continue to communicate with them in that way, the more they're going to build trust in you, the more they're going to start sharing your show with others. That's something that I feel the email part of this often gets overlooked by podcasters, myself included. I know I have not put enough attention on that in the past, and that's something I'm trying to rectify as I go forward. But I feel that's a great way to get to reach people on a more intimate level, and it's on a platform that is much easier to make that connection versus like a Facebook or an Instagram where a lot of your posts are organic and only a small percentage sees it. With your email list, the more you develop good content within that community, the more they're going to get invested in your show and then ultimately start telling others to listen to you as well.
Yeah, great points. Great points. And if I could offer something to Inder, I would say one of the things that I have found through all the years of podcasting for me is really making your audience as much a part of your show as you can. So even if that's a shout out, right? Like you have you have somebody from your community, from your audience that is always participating. They're sending you questions, they're answering questions. Maybe you have a group, a Discord or something like that, and they're always active there. Calling those people out, that in itself, hearing your name spoken on a podcast really means a lot to a lot of people. So I would encourage really make your audience part of the fabric of your show because they're going to keep coming back to hear more and they're going to start getting invested in your community. And that's what this is all about, really. It's either you're going to create an audience, which I believe don't stick around forever, or you create a community, and I believe those people stick around for way longer. Right?
But,
okay.
yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. I want to ask you another question. This feels rapid fire, Jason, because we started a little late today.
I apologize.
That's okay. Not your fault. That was some tech issues. So what I'm going to, and I'm going to share my screen here so that we can take a look at the wheel, and we will spin the wheel to find out who our Minvo winner is. And then I got another question for you, Jason. All right. So this is it. We will see who the winner is of the first of 3 lifetime Minvo subscriptions.
No whammies.
All right, Ronald. I'm not going to pronounce your last name because I'll probably butcher it. Ronald, I'm curious if Ronald is here. We are trying to make this a requirement to actually be listening live right now. Ronald, if you could chime in on the chat, let us know. And just in case, I'm going to spin the wheel for a backup. I'm going to hide him from the wheel now. All right. And just in case, and I'll go back and check the chat out to make sure we have our actual winners. Let's see.
What if it lands on Ronald again? That'd be funny.
I took him off.
Oh, okay.
And Fazel. Okay, so one of these two, hopefully you're here and the first one being Ronald, we will give that to Ronald if he's here today. Congratulations. And Fazel, you are the backup just in case for some reason the winner can't accept their award tonight. All right, so Jason, as we wrap up, let's look ahead a little bit at the future. So, maybe a lot of us back in the day wouldn't have expected podcasting and video to have these blurred lines now. So what trends or shifts do you see shaping the future of this industry, and what should creators focus on if they want to stay ahead of that curve?
Well, I tell you, obviously AI is playing a tremendous role in how we're creating content these days. And on the back end of things in regards to creation and editing, we've got so many tools at our disposal now that make our jobs easier. And it's pretty safe to say that we're just at the very beginning of what that's going to become. So I think more than just podcasting, this transcends podcasting. This is life as a whole. AI is here.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something to resist. This is not something to say, oh God, no, I don't want anything to do with that. No, find a way to utilize it. Find a way that it can work, because it can change everything. And I, with no crystal ball in front of me whatsoever, feel that it's only going to continue to have more of an impact and more of a role as it continues to get more intuitive, as new programs join the fray and start to make an impact and start to cut into that market share that things like Minvo and Perplexity and ChatGPT and all these great platforms that are out there. There's just going to be more. We know it's coming.
Yeah.
And I'll take a page from Nick Nalbach's book and say, don't try to use them all, because you'll just spread yourself so thin that you won't have a clue.
Yep.
Find the ones that work for you and help you create in a way that gives you what you want, makes you happy with the process, keeps you engaged in the process, but ultimately delivers something to your audience that keeps them engaged in you and the community that you're building. There's a lot of platforms out there that are going to help us do that. That's where I see things going. But at the same time, I want to stress, do not skip the fundamentals. Podcasting, video creation, this act of interviewing and collaborating is always going to require the ability to communicate. It's always going to require active listening. And no matter what technology comes into our lives, it's never going to replace human interaction. So always keep that front of mind as well. Use these tools to help you have an easier day, but do not overlook the power of positive communication between human beings.
I love that. And I lied. I have one more question for you, because I know that you are a big Minvo user. We're not just saying that because, Jason's the guest today and this is the Minvo Procast. You have been, I've seen you talking about it on social media, how much you're enjoying using it. So tell me one feature that you particularly love about it, and then tell me a feature that you'd like to see that maybe isn't there yet.
Well, for what it really came down to is you guys talking about it so much. I was like, I got to try this. Apparently I'm missing out. And then when I tried it, I took it for a test drive. I'm like, I was missing out. This is incredible. I love the simplification of all these things that I would normally be doing and having it done within one push of a button. It blew my mind what I was able to create, because and I did this mainly with a client. That was what I wanted to try it out with, to see how this would all come together for their season that I just produced. Got all their video clips. The best thing about it was the transcripts. I just had to do some light editing. But then I was able to take the summaries that Minvo gave me, put them into ChatGPT with some very specific prompts about what I wanted to get a 700 to 800 word blog post, and show notes that accurately described what a listener was going to find when they listen to that show. This is work that's normally going to take days, probably well over a week. Whole process all in was probably 6 hours.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I can't believe this. That, to me, not to say that I had been completely ignorant of what AI could do for me before, but doing it on this level and seeing how not only did it make my job easier, but it wasn't producing fluff. I mean, yes, I had to go in and add some brand voice to what came back. But if I would have had to do that from scratch, that would have taken way more time. So that was one way that Minvo changed the game for me. I would say, in regards to things that need improvement or could be added, and this is nothing that is deal breaking to me, but I think that what it's generating in regards to B-roll, and that's, again, like, I'm sure that that's something that, as the whole solution becomes more intuitive, that's going to get better as well. But that's one thing where I look like, that doesn't really fit. I'll remove that, or I'll replace it. But
what I like, I agree with you. I think what you're referring to is the magic B-roll, right? Like you used to say, add in the B-roll and it adds it in. And sometimes it's hit or miss, but usually the placement of the B-roll is a good spot. So I'll maybe remove the bad B-roll, but keep that location and just replace it with something that I feel is more suiting. So yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, and I know I had texted you about a couple things too. Just like, hey, can I do this? And you're like, yeah, you should. I remember the one was the intro outro. I'm like, thank you. Like again, I'm like every time I go in there and experiment, I'm learning something new that's making the whole process easier. And then once I learn it, I can just build upon that. And yeah, man, I'm glad that I caught you guys talking about this because it was able to change how I do things in a huge way.
Now, I've shared this in the chat, but I want you to share it here while I'm talking to you. I shared bombtrackmedia.com, and if you want to share anything else, please go ahead and do that.
I would say that's a great place to start. Obviously, you're going to get connected to everything there, but go to bombtrackmedia.com/free. And I shared a video series with where I feel the podcast industry is right now and where it needs to go. I know, Mark, you took in that series and gave me a nice review that I have posted on the page as well. But it's a free series to pick up for anybody. It's about an hour, and it's a little opinionated. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, when you listen to it or when you watch it, you're going to see that there's a lot of these things that you're hearing other people in the podcasting world say, and we've got to start saying it differently. The numbers don't connect for me. I can't understand how we're still being told that you need to produce multiple episodes of a podcast per week to be successful, but there's 90% of podcasts that don't get beyond 3.
Yeah.
Major disconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
We have to find a better way to live in harmony as creators. And it all starts with putting better information into the world. And that's what I started with that video series. Free to pick up for anybody.
Yeah. So check that out, bombtrackmedia.com/free to get yours. And I think you'll be happy that you did. I am happy that it all worked out, Jason, and that you're here and that we had another great conversation. Always love having these conversations with you. And I'm not just saying that. We always have lively and fun conversations around the business. So thank you. Appreciate you being here on the Minvo Procast.
I appreciate you being here. And I'm seeing that title belt in the background, my friend.
Yes, that's my fantasy football title belt.
We're 1 week into the season. How was your first week?
I have 2 leagues. The league that I actually win money is the one that I lost this week, and the other one's my free league. I won that one very well. I think I was the second highest scorer in that league.
Right on.
How about you?
Mixed bag. I won 2 matchups and lost 3.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you, Christian McCaffrey.
Oh, yes.
Out. Yeah, that did not help anything.
He hurt a lot of people last night. Yeah,
yes, he did.
Sucks.
I'd also like to throw some curse words at the Cincinnati Bengals for knocking me out of my survivor pool in week 1. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people probably upset about that one, too.
Oh, yeah.
But your Steelers won.
But my Steelers won. Yeah, the kicking Steelers, all field goals, baby. That's all we need, right?
Win's a win. Win's a win. You could be worse. You could be a fan of the Washington Commanders.
That is very true. I don't wish that upon my worst enemy.
All right, Jason, take it easy.
Thanks, Mark.